Hello, I'm John. I'm sat on board Corrick. I'm in Portsmouth Harbour with a very large aircraft carrier over my shoulder. We went out for a nice sail today and we were going to go to the Isle of Wight, but we'd completely forgotten it's the Isle of Wight Festival. Just goes to show you sometimes do need to make a plan. Hope you enjoy this episode. In our last trip, we did 2 journeys of 150 miles and a couple of sails that were 8 hours long. Obviously, when we're doing that with 2 people, in big handfuls, the 150 miles is a good 30-hour trip for us, and that means that we're going to have to get some sleep. That means we're in a situation where there's just one of us keeping a lookout and making decisions about collision avoidance. And I thought I might just talk a little bit about that because a couple of issues came up on those trips, and I've discussed them with other people afterwards, and they've sort of said they've had the same sort of issues happen. A big part of just about any RYA course is the international rules for the prevention of collisions at sea, and people boff up on these and they test one another, and they tend to learn them parrot fashion, such that you can, for example, pick up a flashcard and tell people what is represented on the flashcard. And some of those flashcards are very scenario based. So you're in a sailing vessel, you see this picture, what do you do? It's a good idea to get your head around this, but it isn't everything. And what I would say is much more important is asking yourself 3 very simple questions. Assess for yourself, first of all, is there a collision? If there isn't a risk of collision, you really don't need to bother. If there is a risk of collision, you do need to ask yourself who is the stand-on and who is the give-way vessel. And if you are the give-way vessel, what action are you going to take? It's always... Oops, I'm just going to turn that down for the moment. It's a good idea to have a copy of the rules on board, and we do have in our almanac a set of the rules. And as I sort of indicated earlier, on the courses, people tend to concentrate on can you identify what things are and who what the responsibilities are between vessels. But I would say that there is a run-up to the international rules for the prevention of collisions at sea that is worth recapping, and I'm going to do that now because actually it sort of leads you through how they're meant to be applied. Something I will say right up front is that you won't find the phrase right-of-way vessel in the rules, I don't think, because there is always a responsibility between vessels, such that should there be any sort of collision, then there's a good chance that it's at least a bit of one another's faults. So there is a stand-on vessel, there is a give-way vessel, but nothing gets you past the rule that says that there is a responsibility between vessels. So if you're overly close, you've got to have to take a little bit of the blame yourself. There's then a section on defining things, and that's obviously important, but it's worth reading for yourself. The thing that I would go very quickly to is Rule 5, and Rule 5 is about the responsibility to keep a good lookout. We very rarely leave the cockpit unattended. Overnight, on a long journey, then obviously going down, giving your relief a shake, or putting a cup of coffee on, or doing some work on the chart table, absolutely fine. But there is a responsibility up front to maintain a good lookout and bob around. There are, sorry about this sudden inject from what is quite clearly the following day, but there's a couple of things that I intended to mention but didn't. First of all, it's worth having a good think about just exactly how far you can see and how fast things are traveling, because that does give you some indication of how often you need to make sure that you've swept around the horizon. So if we say that standing in our cockpit we're about 6 feet above the sea surface, that means that we can probably see something that isn't very high at about 3 miles. If it's at 3 miles and we're traveling at 6 knots, then we'll get there in half an hour. So something lying in the surface, if we could see it, would be about half an hour away, and that's worth thinking about. The other thing, that if we were meeting a coaster coming straight towards us, and that coaster was, I don't know, let's say 40 feet high, then we would see that at about 8 miles. And if it was moving at about 12 to 15 knots straight towards us, that would get to us in about half an hour as well. So there, as a rule of thumb, if you've had a spectacularly good look around the horizon, you should have somewhere in the order of half an hour before you need to look again. But to be honest, I would caution against that, because your chances of spotting things right on the first cusp that they can be seen, I would say, is a little bit limited. So as I say, we don't stay down below for much longer than it takes to do the chart work, make a cup of coffee. The other thing that I didn't talk about was listening. Small motorboats, things like that, you're going to very often, and jet skis, sometimes affectionately referred to as the Romford Navy, jet skis, you'll hear those before you see them. So be careful about listening to audiobooks and that sort of thing over in the cockpit. And the other one is VHF. We leave VHF on channel 16 all the time. We move the handheld to the frequencies that we need for VTS and things like that, and calling. The other one, there is a reasonably lively debate that goes on about using VHF in order to help with collision avoidance. And if you see somebody and you think it's going to be close, do you call them up? My advice would be to try to avoid that. I think that adding those things in adds a layer of complexity and confusion, and there is absolutely no guarantee that you're speaking the same language as the guy on the bridge of the other ship. I would make the motion of the boat the thing that signals your intent, rather than trying to contact another bridge. But that said, we do listen the whole time, and we can get a sense of what's going on around us occasionally. So if that was rule 5, rule 6 is about safe speed. Now, in your average yacht, maintaining a safe speed doesn't tend to be too much of a problem. It would be, yeah. But all I would say is that in fog, you really do need to think about it. Rule 7 is the one that is going back to the 3 main questions, is the main one: is there a risk of collision? Now, in the good old days, with when the only thing that most yachts had was a hand-bearing compass, that is how you would do it. A lot of boats these days have radar, and nearly any boat crossing the channel, I would highly recommend having one of the 2 different AISs fitted. Now, we've got AIS fitted, and it does give you an awful lot of information, and I think that's very, very valuable for tying in with what it is you can actually see. One of the things that I'll say about AIS is that very often, if there is a ship that has any special characteristics, for example, being restricted in ability to maneuver or being engaged in tow, they will put that out on their AIS. And therefore, if you're looking at a confusing set of lights, then have a look to see, actually, is there a clue in the AIS? I won't talk too much about radar because we don't have it, and I think of the time we've had the boat, I've only ever really wanted it once. But the one thing that I would say about the electronic aids is don't allow yourself to be distracted by them. They are just aids, and the number of times that boats have either gone aground or hit something whilst all of the senior or high-priced help making the decisions were busy looking at the nav aids, too many to be funny. There is a general description of the actions that you should take to avoid a collision, and those should be clear, evident. You can combine alterations of course with an alteration of speed, but think it through. And when it talks, we get later to the rules for the alterations between vessels. If your alteration involves an alteration to port, I really think very seriously about whether you're doing the right thing or not. So, crossing the channel, large number of traffic separation schemes. Be sure you understand the responsibilities inside there as well, particularly sailing vessel, but there is still a responsibility to cross the traffic separation zone, traffic separation scheme, sorry, at as close to perpendicular as practicable. Rule 12 deals with conduct of sailing vessels encountering one another, and we should all be, I'm guessing everybody watching this channel is pretty comfortable with the idea that the responsibilities between vessels on different tacks, the way I remember it, and it's particularly easy for us because we've got a tiller, which is if you're on the right, you're in the right, you're on the port tack when you are on the starboard side of the boat. But similarly, if you're not sure, then you should assume you are the giveaway vessel. Overtaking is pretty straightforward and clear. Head-on situations, again, pretty straightforward. An alteration of course to starboard. Situation we had crossing the channel was as we were heading north. As we got to the north side of the channel, we started to encounter a large amount of traffic coming at us from our starboard side. And it was very definitely our job to keep out of the way. And I think it's important to remember that when you do that, the keywords are that you should take the action early, it should be substantial, and it should result in you staying well clear. Now, there's a possibility that you could carry on altering course to starboard forever and never get to your destination. You need to take a judgment of how you do that when you encounter a series of vessels coming down the channel. So we're very fortunate that we've got the AIS built into the plotter on the bridge deck, and that does allow us to look at a ship on the plotter, look at a ship through the monocular itself, make sure we're looking at the right thing, make a judgment of what it is. But what we then get is a very accurate calculation of the closest point of approach and the angle on which it's going to be, and that allows you to then shape your course around those vessels, keeping a close look on it. It is worth saying that we have the ability to set an alarm on our AIS, such it'll alarm when there is a high likelihood of a close quarters situation, and we also have vectors showing that show exactly which way the course and speed over the ground, and that tied in with our own course and speed over the ground vectors allows us to have a very good pictorial representation of what is happening. That said, the true thing is the bearings, and we keep the monocular close to hand in order to just double check, particularly when things are getting a little bit close. So the way we tend to work it, one of us on watch, the other one asleep. The one on watch is keeping a good lookout. We're obviously traveling at a safe speed, very difficult for us to do anything more than that, and we are marrying up the contacts that we can see visually with what we've got on the AIS and just making sure that we aren't missing something. Clearly there could still be a yacht that doesn't have AIS or something like that, but what we're then doing is saying, is there a risk of collision? Now that will be warned to us by the AIS plotter, and we'll also see the steady bearing. Once we've assessed that there is a risk of collision, then we're saying who is the stand one on the giveaway vessel, and making a decision on that, and then if we are the giveaway vessel, making early substantial alteration in order to keep well clear. I do encounter a number of people who sort of have a bit of a shrug when it comes to the rules and say might is right, or if they're bigger than me, I'll keep out of its way. And there is a sort of place for that, so long as you do it really well clear. Keeping out of the way when you're the stand-on vessel, when things have got a bit close, is a deeply dodgy thing to do, because you might be making your alteration just at the time the giveaway vessel has decided to make their alteration as well. One of the things I said right at the beginning is that people quite often regard learning the rules as a bit of a chore, something you need to do in order to get through. And I sort of understand that, but what I would absolutely suggest you try to do is make the stuff that you're learning, set it in context. Imagine you are in a situation and what you would do next. It's all very well being able to identify a particular type of ship or a particular set of lights or a sound signal, but it's what are you going to do about it? Does it indicate the risk of collision? Who is the giveaway vessel? What are you going to alter or do in order to make sure that you keep well clear? The other thing I would say is don't be shy about either asking questions if you're not sure or testing one another as you go along. Quite often when we're sailing along, when we report to one another, somebody looking underneath the sail because the person on the helm can't see under, will say, yeah, at whatever relative bearing it is, I have this type of vessel, the bearing is moving left or right, and add in the, it is a power-driven vessel, we are the stand-on vessel, or that sort of information, just in order to reinforce that understanding of the rules, the responsibility between the ships, and what to do about it. And similarly, don't be shy about when you've seen a situation, getting the flashcards out, recreating it, and having a conversation about what to do. In our particular case, it wasn't actually a tow, but we did have 3 different vessels coming down, and on the AIS they all looked really close together because of the scale we were at. By the time we got a bit closer to it, it all looked a bit more like that, and we were able to go round the stern of one and in front of the other 2, keeping well clear and not finding ourselves in Dover. I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for watching. Yeah, thanks. Bye.